The First World War, later dubbed the Great War, began on a fateful summer day in 1914. Europe, already tense with political alliances and rivalries, was thrown into chaos after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary in Sarajevo. A tangled web of alliances drew nations into a conflict that would span continents and reshape the world. The outbreak, the news of the assassination, sent shockwaves through Europe. Austria-Hungary, backed by Germany, issued an ultimatum to Serbia, where the assassin had ties. Serbia's partial compliance wasn't enough, and on July 28, 1914, Russia-Hungary declared war. Russia mobilized to protect Serbia, prompting Germany to declare war on Russia. Within days, France and Britain joined the fray, and the world was at war. The early days of the war. Among the young men swept up in the fervor was Émile Lefebvre, a 19-year-old Frenchman. He worked in his father's bakery in a small village near Verdun, dreaming of a quiet life. But when France mobilized, Émile volunteered. The idea of defending his homeland stirred both fear and pride in his heart. He left behind his family and Marie, his sweetheart, promising to return by Christmas. Meanwhile, in England, Thomas Harrington, a Yorkshire farmer, enlisted. Like Émile, he believed the war would be short. Britain's call to arms had inspired thousands, and propaganda painted the enemy as cruel and heartless. "Fight for king and country," the posters declared. The trenches. By late 1914, the war had ground to a stalemate. The Western Front stretched from the North Sea to Switzerland, a scar across Europe. Émile and Thomas, now enemies by fate, faced each other across the barren expanse of no man's land. Life in the trenches was hell. Soldiers endured mud, lice, and the omnipresent stench of decay. The cold winters brought frostbite, and the summers brought disease. Shellfire was a constant companion, and the ground shook with every explosion. Émile wrote to Marie whenever he could. His letters spoke of hope, but also hinted at the horrors he witnessed. "The nights are the worst," he wrote. "The screams of the wounded echo in the dark, and we can only pray for morning." Thomas, too, wrote home. His letters were filled with reassurances to his family and fiancée Mary. But he kept the truth from them, the friends he had lost, the fear that gripped him during every attack, and the silent dread that he might never return. Christmas 1914. On Christmas Eve, a strange and beautiful event occurred. Along parts of the front, soldiers laid down their weapons. Émile, holding a small candle, emerged from his trench, his breath visible in the cold night air. Across no man's land, Thomas saw the flickering light and heard the faint strains of a carol. "Silent night, holy night." The song spread, and soon soldiers from both sides climbed out of their trenches. They exchanged gifts of chocolate and cigarettes, shared photographs of loved ones, and even played football. For a brief moment, the war stopped and humanity prevailed. But it couldn't last. By the next day, officers on both sides ordered the fighting to resume. Émile and Thomas returned to their trenches, knowing they might one day face each other in battle. 1916, the Battle of the Somme. By 1916, the war had become a slaughterhouse. The Battle of the Somme was one of the bloodiest campaigns. On the first day alone, Britain suffered 5,7,000 casualties. Thomas was among those sent over the top, charging into machine gun fire. Émile, now a seasoned soldier, defended a position near the Somme. The roar of artillery and the cries of the wounded were deafening. When the British attacked, Émile found himself face to face with a young soldier. It was Thomas. Time seemed to freeze as they stared at each other. Both hesitated, rifles shaking in their hands. but a shell exploded nearby, throwing them both to the ground. When Thomas regained consciousness, Emil was gone, and the battlefield was littered with bodies. The final years. The war dragged on, draining nations of resources and morale. The introduction of tanks and poison gas added new horrors. By 1917, America had entered the war, tipping the balance in favor of the Allies. Emil survived Verdun, the Somme, and countless skirmishes, but the weight of war wore on him. His letters to Marie became fewer, and his hope waned. Thomas, too, grew weary. The friends he had joined with were gone, and the idealism of 1914 was replaced with a grim determination to survive. Armistice. On November 11, 1918, the guns fell silent. The war was over. Emil returned to his village, his spirit scarred but alive. Marie greeted him with tears of joy, but the Emil who left was not the Emil who returned. Thomas returned to Yorkshire, where Mary waited for him. He tried to resume his life as a farmer, but the memories of the trenches haunted him. He often thought of the young French soldier he had spared and wondered if he had survived. A legacy of lessons. The First World War claimed over 16 million lives and left an indelible mark on the world. For Emil, Thomas, and countless others, it was a reminder of humanity's capacity for both destruction and compassion. Though the war was over, its shadows lingered, shaping a new generation and ensuring that its stories would never be forgotten.